I wanted to ask you a couple things that relate to you and cantata singers.
Mm-hmm.
I still remember perhaps the first time I ever heard cantata singers. I'm not quite sure whether it was the first time, but it was in 1975, and it was a performance of the St. Matthew Passion with you conducting. And I have the thought that I might never have heard the piece before. It's possible, because
Wow.
I was really kind of hayseed. But I know I'd never heard a live performance. Probably heard recordings.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I remember being just flabbergasted by this piece and incredibly captivated, gripped by this performance, by this group I really didn't know, and this conductor whom I knew you somehow.
Yeah, I think I knew you in wind ensemble situations and so forth.
Yes,
Yeah.
as a horn player.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we had done stuff.
And I remember what I remember of that performance was its incredible intensity that seemed not to come from any desire to be intense or no effort to bring out the intensity, but rather it came from something inside the piece, which I've always thought was true of your conducting anything I've heard you conduct, seen and heard you conduct. And I remember coming back in Sanders Theater to the backstage area after the performance to say whatever I wanted to say to you, and you were sitting down. I don't know, this is still very vivid, how many years, 45, 50 years ago. You were sitting down quietly, and there were people milling about, of course, and I greeted you and said something about the performance. I have no idea what I said. You said, well, the piece is still there.
Yeah, no kidding.
And that struck me so powerfully that the times that I've ended up conducting the St. Matthew Passion since then, that's kind of sat on the side for me, because I think if you had the feeling that you could destroy this piece with a performance that was inadequate, which all performances are.
Yeah,
You'd never do it. You'd just say, I think I'll do something else other than that.
It's really, yeah, it is. I remember I was friends with Fred Laerdal from way back, and I remember when I said I was going to be conducting this piece. He says, well, it was almost the same statement. He says, well, that piece will survive anybody who conducts it. And I said, I know what you mean.
Yeah.
Because I always felt in that piece, when you get to what I feel is the first huge emotional high point, which is the tenor and the chorus, you feel by Nies and Wachen, which is just an unbelievable peak in the piece, that in those choral things, the hardest thing is to stay back, is to just let the singer's emotion come out, but not lead it too much. There's so many places in that piece where the piece is going to do more than you can urge it or than you invite it to do. Which is really, I think in a piece like that, it's when you realize that that happens, where your task is as much to stay out as anything. Just let the sum total of the people you've assembled. That was really listening to other people's conductings. I've always admired when people can let it happen. It was, of course, the total essence of Craig. I mean, to the last degree.
Yes.
To the point that when I first heard Craig, I thought, what's going on here?
Yeah.
Because you did not see the connection, but it was there, but it wasn't an obvious deal, I think that's true of a lot of conductors I've watched closely. Best of Levine was always like that. He was not a major part of the event, at least not in the way he was presenting himself to the orchestra. It's huge amount, and of course, he had this total Socratic theory about even difficult places in a score, which is if you lead it too much, they will never hear it well enough, which is a really interesting idea.
Well, in the case of the St. Matthew Passion, that the approach of staying out of it in the bigger moments, in the big choruses, even the chorales to a certain degree, it's reinforced by the fact that the tenor who's singing the evangelist role is also kind of an equal partner in an unusual way from almost any, St. John Passion too, of course, but in an unusual way for almost any music we know, even opera for that
Right,
matter.
there's nothing quite like it. It's a shared pacing responsibility. And I think, and you've probably discovered, I know when I've heard you do the piece, you probably have done the same thing that we pretty much do with the evangelists, is they have to be allowed their space.
Yeah.
It works better when they do what they think how
And yet
they understand it.
Both people have to somehow have at least similar ideas about the connections between.
Yes, and certainly the joints have
Yeah.
to be agreed. But there's a lot of space where it belongs to that singer, and needs to. I guess it really has to.
Do you have any memories of that performance? Is that the only
Oh,
time
yeah.
you've conducted it?
No, I did it. I did it again. Well, I did it at Emmanuel with a very different group. Just after Craig died, Craig was scheduled for it, and then and that was a very different kind of cast, a different setting. But I did it a second time as a guest with cantata singers.
Oh, I thought you did the St. John.
St. John I did with you guys. At your invitation I did. Oh, that's right. Yes.
Yeah.
But that was considerably later.
Yeah.
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 That was an amazing experience. That's so much harder.
Well,
That piece is so much harder.
Proportions are odd.
Yeah, it's a very jagged continuity.
Edgy piece.
Edgy, yeah. Uncomfortable, and it never wants to get comfortable. It's a really different experience. Really glad to have had that experience because it really is so completely another set of issues. But no, I remember that first cantata singer as well.
Carl Dan Sorensen.
Carl Dan, of course, Jane Struess. It was a very unusual
Yeah.
cast. Jimmy, the young Jim, Madalena. I mean, he was. Remember, that was just right at the beginning of his arrival here in town,
Yeah.
and a very young singer to be doing that music. Yeah, I can remember it. I guess you remember those things always well too. I mean,
Well, if that was the first time I heard cantata singers, and I'm not sure it was, but it was certainly the one that impressed it.
yeah, that would have
Self
been around
on
70,
me.
75, 70.
It was also would have been the first time I heard Carl Dan Sorensen sing.
Very unusual singer.
Yeah.
I remember he was in your Seasons,
Yes.
one of his last performances, I think. Extraordinary, actually. I mean,
Yeah.
he stopped singing for no other reason than he stopped singing, because I thought he was completely there in that.
I remember he just retired to Maine or wherever it was, and when he wrote me or called me 5 years later and said, "I think I'd like to come back into the chorus. Could I do that?"
Wow.
And
Is that how that occurred with that late performance of? Because he sang.
And he said, "I don't want any solos. I just want to sing in the tenor section." I said, "Of course, by all means." So he came back, and I said, "Carl Dan, did you sing at all during those 5 years? And he said, not a note. I said, not even in the shower?
Wow.
And he said, not a note. And I think that accounted for the fact that when he was in his mid 70s, he sounded like he was,
That was-
50.
That was hallucinatory. I mean, I've never heard a singer that age sound that fresh.
Yeah.
It was amazing. And
he-
of course, his sound was so distinctive. I mean, it was just not like anything else we've ever heard. Very, very definite. I gather that's a Nordic tenor sound, but we don't know it too often. It's really,
Right.
really unusual.
I was talking with Peter Child yesterday, and he asked me because I had he knew that I had been a composer
Well, you're
by
back,
training.
You're back
and-
out there. You've got it.
Well, I don't think writing
Yeah.
one or two pieces makes it so, but
Look, any piece that's out there the last few months, you're in.
well, thank you.
As I
It's like
saw-
being in the
as-
Viola Society,
Exactly.
right? Yeah, yes, thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he asked me how I thought being a composer influenced and also how being a horn player influenced my being a conductor.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder if I might turn that on you and ask you what you think, what you observe about your own conducting that connects to you as a composer, presuming that you're conducting somebody else's piece.
Well, of course, I went through a phase way back in this region of doing a lot of new music concerts, which I found stressful. I've always admired your incredible resilience. I remember the Jerry Levinson piece. I thought,
Maybe just
"Oh,
obliviousness.
my goodness, yeah, yeah. But I went up. I imploded in the middle of an Ed Campion piece.
Only one time?
This was a terrible implosion. And
Oh
it
no,
was-
but I did it. I did it. So
I went down in flames, and that was my retirement really from that kind of gig. I just thought I obviously, because it was one of those concerts where every piece is pretty demanding just in terms of remembering what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
But that was like I flamed out, and it was, I thought, a very good piece, and Ed was a friend of mine. I felt terrible, so that was my retirement day. But I remember always feeling that from watching conductors that no one knows how much woodshedding you do to do that kind of work. You can't. There are probably a few phenoms who can do stuff like that on site, but most everybody else really has to know
Yeah.
the roadmap, or you just can't survive. And I also felt, though, that doing that was really good for other kinds of music. I became much more curious about what the players do and don't need, and what's helpful and what isn't, and so forth. And of course, playing, I think, is the most valuable thing for conductors in terms of finding out what can. You play and you see things, and you see what you find helpful and what you don't. And I think for me, the most intense experience of that was being, I don't think I ever told you this, but when I got to Tanglewood, I was a conducting fellow, but I was way down the totem pole, and the chance of actually ever getting up there and conducting looked like hopeless. So I went around and auditioned for all the other departments. This was way back when things were much more fluid. Mm-hmm. And I took the orchestra audition. I took a vocal audition, which had very
Not possible today.
comical results, actually. Yeah, I sang the world premiere of baritone as in Harold Farberman's Greek Scene. And it was such a strange hallucination to do that I made Ellen Heistine open up. She had a book on every season. I said, I've got to know that this actually happened. If you can find it in your book, it was there. It happened. And I was actually sent out to do church solos and stuff as a singer. It was crazy. But the wonderful thing about it was, though I wasn't ever in front of the orchestra as a Tanglewood fellow. I sat way at the front of the viola section, and at the end of the year, I asked Pasquale, who made the assignment, says, "Well, why did you put me up there? Everybody in the section
They have
played
nice
better than played
glamorous
they played
tones.
much better than I did." He says, "Yeah, I remember the audition." He says, "You seem to know how the pieces go." I said, "Yeah, get you up front there, you won't get lost." But being up front was like being a foot and 2 feet away from Monteur,
Yeah.
and Munch, who
Yeah.
was a very interesting conductor, very emotional conductor, and all kinds of Copeland. That was so, at that distance, so helpful, particularly to see with Monteur how very contained and only necessary attention, and his comments were incredibly at the simplest level. I mean, he never talked about much except being together, some tuning things, a few things about dynamics, but all at the just level one. And that seemed to be all that was necessary if he could be clear enough, which he certainly was.
Yeah.
Also, the thing that I picked up from him was courtesy. He was so extremely aware of keeping an atmosphere on that people could work in, and an awful lot of the people we saw weren't. It was so interesting to be that close up.
But I'm wondering if you could talk about how being a composer has influenced your conducting. For instance, I said to Peter that I thought there were a lot of conductors who were event conductors. There's the cymbals are here, and it's loud, and then it's soft, and there's an accent on the third beat, and the trombones enter in bar 25. And that's all important, but it seemed like it wasn't the point. And that I thought the thing that at least was interesting to me was trying to figure out how your piece or Peter's piece or Haydn's piece works. What is it that makes it work?
I think one of the things we depend on from conductors is two big things. What's the setting in which the piece appears? Is it part of a sequence which listeners are going to be in a good frame? And also time management. Is the conductor responsible to the pieces in terms of the breakdown of the minutes, which is, I think, the higher the salary of the conductor, the less you can depend on it. I mean, if you're a composer and you see that Beethoven's Fifth is on the program, you don't react with relief.
Right.
That's going to free up minutes for your music.
Right.
It's almost the reverse.
Yeah.
That is, if it's a really familiar piece coming, there's going to be lots of polish. Beethoven's Fifth is not under-rehearsed, even when everyone knows it. Yeah. So I don't know, I remember when you did elegiac songs, one of the things that really mattered a lot to me was that it occupied as much time on the rehearsal as it needed to get together. In other words, it was clear that you were ready to sort of say, okay, this has got to fit together. There's some other things on the program that are going to go down quicker. And that's, I think, the thing that composers are most nervous about. When we're instructing, we instruct the composers at Tanglewood, the student composers, about etiquette with the conductor. And we really spend quite a lot of time on it because it's so crucial to what is going to happen. And first of all, we say, you don't rush up from, even if he says, if you hear anything, come on up, don't do it. the conductor will function well with you in a break in the time that's set aside from that. The rest of the time is his to decide, and you will only get your best shake if you are very understanding of that and all the pressure that means. The other thing is that what you want to do is store up your comments and organize them and try to get the most important things up to the front. Don't depend on the conductor to have to sort that out about what's most important to you, because and mostly we have to restrain, particularly the youngest composers, from the fact that this is their rehearsal. It isn't, you know. Yeah. And the sooner they find that out, they've just got to learn that fast. And if we also teach them conducting for composers, and the main thing that we have to enforce on them in that segment is don't guess that most corrections will self-correct on the second or third time. So don't, as a conductor, don't stop for everything. Learn what you're going to have to stop for, because mostly those guys in their first conducting events, first thing that happens that they don't like, and everything goes up in smoke, because what you lose then is not only the time, but you lose a lot of what the performers want to give you, because they're just thinking, hey, we'll get that next time, you know. I mean,
yeah.
Don't get so worried so soon. This is, I think, for composers, a realistic expectation of what time means is probably the best thing they need to acquire. That it's not yet a decision, but they will get the best deal if they cooperate in every possible way with the conductor. And it's really hard for them to do that, particularly because they're keyed up beyond belief. I mean,
so with cantata singers at Emmanuel Music and a large variety of places, you've conducted lots of other composers' music, especially Bach and Schütz, but many other things. I know you did a Haydn Seasons, I think. It's technically hard for the orchestra. It's a lot of singing for the chorus.
A lot of singing for the chorus. And a lot of really quite specific and demanding solo singing too. Yeah. I mean, it's a bundle.
And then, of course, the most viscerally exciting music is the third season, autumn, for obvious reasons, the harvest and the hunt and all of that. But the greatest music is in winter after that, but it's almost flat.
I think both that. I think the big Haydn pieces are some of the hardest things in the catalog. Really.
I think.
And everyone does them.
I think the creation is much easier because it's a little more invincible.
Well, that's good. It speaks for it. Yes, I know, but I still think it's much harder than it seems, even though people sort of know it.
Well, it's so much more detailed.
Yeah.
Than
and the orchestra,
even the Lord Nelson Mass.
The orchestra parts are filled with really challenging things for the players, and I was a little startled at just how much there was that needed attention. That really didn't come together easily, and then you do hear those pieces kind of everywhere.
So what is your experience like? Let's say you're doing a new music concert, like a collage new music concert, and there are 4 or 5 pieces on that concert, 3 or 4 of them by other composers you know well or don't know well or never met before, and a piece of yours.
No, that's...
What's that? How different are those experiences, conducting your music and conducting, Jacob Druckmann's music, or this young composer who's just coming up?
That's not easy. I remember I introduced a piece of mine with Joan Heller with collage called Samuel Chapter.
Love it. It's a great piece.
Which really, it's very, it's very blunt, but
Yep.
in a way,
That's
but
right.
it's still, I still felt, I felt as a colleague, because there was a new music concert, there were a lot of other pieces, and I felt as a colleague very torn about trying to settle it, and also feel that that my role as conductor had to be somewhat more detached. I don't think that's easy to do. I've always felt that the composer who doesn't conduct is in a better position in that situation by feeling that like he's just in the pack. And Samuel Chapter, well, I came through that concert in a much more worried state. First of all, that had I been fair to the other pieces, and did we get the piece up to where it got a good start? You've given a good start to so many of my pieces, and it turns out that's pretty important. It psychologically for the composer, but also for the next performance, because really it is as the young composer will, although they all find out, the performances kind of depend on each other more than you could even imagine. A piece that starts out not itself in some fundamental way will have a hard go. And a lot of the people that I've been teaching at Tanglewood over the last few years have experienced that. That it is hard to, well, for instance, here's a perfect example. Kate Soper, the first of her pieces were very much more like New York, Columbia kind of pieces, very intricate, detail-filled pieces. And she had a few performances which I have to say did not speak very well for the pieces. And her reaction was she had to secede and form an ensemble, which she has done. And actually, it's been a good solution for her. But I think it was for the start of her so-called, career as a composer very difficult, because she was writing harder music than fit the slots,
Yeah.
for sure. She still is, but I think she has a different kind of control now.
Yeah.
Because her music has now become more and more idiosyncratic. I think she really depends on being able to sort of work in an open rehearsal format.
Have you had pieces of yours whose birthing was less than
Yeah, I have.
what might have been near disastrous, or where you felt like this piece will never get off the ground because this is the only evidence of its value?
Yeah, I have. I think, yeah, I can remember a couple instances of that sort. The very first time around, my first symphony was pretty seriously under rehearsed.
Do you remember what was on the concert with it?
It was very big time,
Yeah.
heavy stuff. They had to really spend a lot of time on. Yeah, I understood the situation, but it was difficult. It got better.
Just during the course of the four
Well, it came
performances?
back in the summer too,
Oh, I see,
which was
yeah.
very helpful to it. But yeah, that was difficult. It was, in fact, so shaggy in terms of the orchestra's grasp of it that Ozawa did a very unusual thing, because they had signed almost ahead of time to record it, and he called a complete extra section to work on the slow movement again, because he, to his credit, knew that they were really, really not in any kind of ensemble condition in that. But yeah, that was a little bit rough. That was rough. Couple times I was in a part of a European festival in Berlin, and they were very short order, not the sort of ideal of those diligent European sort of, we shall live with this piece, and it's harder to take if you know that people are hearing your music that have no idea that it's the only. I always tell my composing students, every piece you have to realize is the only piece that audience of yours is ever likely to hear.
Yeah.
I mean, take that kind of care of it. But it was a piece that I really staked a lot on, And they got into the piece, and I would say about 2 minutes in, something happened. And they detached. And they had no oral familiarity with the piece. But what really killed me, what really I hadn't expected, was at the moment that the glitch happened, rather than an anxiety sweeping through the group, their gestures and demeanor became more confident. And there was that kind of, they knew something was gone off the cliff. But instead there was that little confident thing that you see string players do, and we've done a million of these, Not a single sound from minute 2 was what I had written, And this was my first big performance as a graduate student.
Yeah.
And it was like, swallow it, just bite down on it.
And what did they say afterwards? Did they say, wasn't that great?
They said, hey, sorry about that.
Ah.
But I thought, wow, this is a hard world out here, because there was no rewind. That was that year, and it was a hard way to deal with it.
You really want them just to stop and say, let's start over.
I had seen both approaches. Stopping is much better. No one has ever forgotten the magnificent moment where you restarted the Embry.
When I was about one page from the end.
That's a legend in its own
I
time.
know, but not a happy legend.
Well, I enjoyed it. I actually enjoyed it. And when I realized what was happening, I thought, this is pretty cool. Because it really was like it seemed like about an 18-minute piece.
Yep.
That was, this is exactly the opposite. These guys were, that's the breaks. But I had been at a New York New Music concert, Charlie Warren's group. They played quite often my pieces. And they started a piece by a British 16th century composer, Thomas Tye. And that thing went up in about the first minute. And I thought, well, of course they've got to start over, Yeah. No. Again, it was the same thing. The physical comfort increased, sort of nodding.
But the harmonies made no sense.
It was all diatonic, pan-diatonic.
Yeah.
The seven diatonic notes were kind of omnipresent for about 10 minutes. It was really a long thing. And afterwards I said, hey, guys, maybe the audience thought that was really a very progressive, wild piece for, 1610. But
It was a new music concert, right?
I said, but what were you thinking? Well, look, we didn't want to embarrass ourselves. I mean,
and he's dead anyway. So
getting lost in a simple, oh man. So I realized, having had that as background, I mean, it's fair game. But that New York pro stance, the sense that it becomes, everything looks more confident the more lost they are, is something that you kind of got to. It takes a little getting used to.
Well, you said that there was a new music concert where you went up, and that was the end of your conducting new music. But I'm shocked, because for me, there was a period in my life when I thought, oh my God, am I ever going to do a concert when I don't stop and start something over? Because it seemed like it was a succession. It just went on way too long. And I finally just said, no matter what happens tonight, I'm not going to stop. And sure enough, something happened, but I just, got it fixed as fast as I could.
That's the better method. See, I didn't really have the chops to do that at the time with the Ed Campion. Plus, it was, I don't know. It was deep into the piece too. That was the frustrating
Yeah.
part. And I thought to go back, everything went through, racing through my mind. Go back, but try to recue some people. The recueing didn't work because it put them into another wrong place. And it's a tough situation. Every once in a while, I think I've been at concerts where the starting over has been so satisfying because they did one at one of the tryout conductors for NEP started over, and I thought good. It was like maybe it was the Chen Yip piece. I'm not sure. I thought it was in a way, a good save. I mean, because really, why not? First of all, it's interesting when they get it right. You think that was a good
Yeah.
that was a good move there. But having been on the other side of that story, I just feel like it's always better to try to go back and get it right. If I had Ed Campion to do over, I would even though I was pretty far in, I would say 5 minutes. I'd say, okay, let's hear it again. Let's see if we can get it right this time. It was one of those changing meter things, which I know I'd rehearsed, but the moment I lost it, I thought this isn't rescuable. A few people are already launched into another world, and it was pretty miserable. Also, of course, one is aware. I think it's very when you do that in some older piece, which still does happen. The composer isn't there, but the composer's there. You're thinking, oh my God, yeah, something has.
But
to
I
happen
remember talking to Craig Smith after a Cantata Singers concert that he had heard, that I had not heard, and that you had conducted. And I said, so Craig, how was the concert? He said, oh, it was really very good. He said, but John started a Bach cantata over. He knew, I don't remember what the cantata was, but I think you started it over within 2 measures or something.
Yeah,
because somebody misread something.
I started 161
The flutes were,
right at
Gone.
the beginning, within a bar or two.
yeah.
Yeah, never regretted that at all. First of all, I just love that piece so much. I thought you should
that
not.
chorale.
Oh my God, everything about that. I love that piece so much. And I just thought, well, look, everybody can hear that this is wrong.
That's right.
unlike my string quartet, which I heard it was wrong, but yeah. Oh boy. One of the things I wanted to do when we moved up here to Boston the next year is put together a group, and we did that string quartet 0 to a point that we really weren't going to fall apart. Yeah, right.
And is it worth now calling your string quartet number 1 and moving all the numbers to the right?
Not really. There were some good things in the piece, but it's very, as a lot of music at that time was, it's very steeped in the large presence of Elliott Carter. I think 1960 was a high point. There was second Elliott Carter quartet. And, it kind of carries a lot of the burden of that. I think it was fun to play because a lot of independent rhythmic stuff, and our quartet, when we had a quartet briefly up here with my sister and Bentley Layton, we learned it.
He was a wonderful cellist.
Yeah, we learned it pretty well. We really had it down. But it's a little funny to be. Well, there were a few moments when we were performing my own music when I thought we got into plenty good trouble. We used to play the Webern Quartet, which is, I think, quite wonderful piece.
Not the string quartet pieces, but the quartet.
The quartet.
Yeah.
It's much harder than the string quartet pieces.
Many fewer notes. And
Yes.
much more difficult.
And the 3 notes are wonderful and in very tough places. But that one we had a few not so great nights with. Partly it's just hard to find, everywhere on the instrument all the time. I always respected in the David Zinman conducting classes, which I used to audit once in a while, and these subjects would come up, and I always liked his attitude. He always said, if you get into trouble and you can improve the situation by starting, it's not, it's the piece. You've got to get the piece down.
Yeah. Unlike the quartet that played
Yeah.
your zero quartet.
Yeah, because they were not so far in by the time they were gone.
Yeah. But they cared more about their own.
Yes, and also of course they had clearly done so little rehearsing that they didn't have the autocorrect opportunity. I mean, you can really tell when people get to that point that they can manage things if they have trouble. But wow.
Probably the scariest time for me, or maybe the most uncomfortable time for me, was not that Embry pilgrimage performance, which was just ridiculous because it happened so late in the piece that I started over, but a performance of Milton Babbitt's Head of the Bed.
Oh boy, that's
And
been dangerous on many
It's
occasions.
such a rough piece, and it's made up of a whole bunch of solos and duets, but the soprano sings all the time, every measure. I mean, there's
all the way through.
hardly
Right.
more than an eighth rest or a quarter rest. And to be honest, the players hated it. And toward the beginning, there's a violin solo, and then there's a cello solo and a clarinet and flute. They come in that sequence or something like that. And the performance was going fine, and got through about a third of the piece. And wonderful soprano, very experienced, knew the piece very well, went up
Yikes.
and got a beat ahead or a beat behind, and this went on for a little bit, and I thought, I don't know how to fix this. This is going to be another 8 minutes of not being synchronized, and so I stopped, and we started over. Afterwards, the violinist, dear friend, Kathy French, came up to me and said, I want to kill you because I just got through my solo, and it actually was good the first time.
Yeah, I know.
And then you started over and made me play it again. So I felt guilty about that, but I didn't know what else to do. I didn't have the wherewithal to say, go this way, go that way,
Did you ever do Seymour's satires?
Oh, yes.
That's a tough trip.
Well, I remember the one time I did it, the singer, wonderful singer, didn't really have enough time to learn it.
Yeah, that
And
was my situation.
she was rhythmically accurate, but the pitches were kind of in the cracks. And Chris Oldfather was playing piano. It wasn't collage, but he was playing piano. And I remember in the performance that, he's playing the piano part, which is unto itself complex,
Huge
involved,
amount.
and he's feeding her pitches
Oh,
in an almost inaudible way.
wow.
Now, my admiration for him, which was already high,
That's pretty amazing.
just went way up because his ears are incredible, and he just knew exactly what he needed to do
That's-
to get her, because the
That
voice part's never doubled by the
That piece
instrument.
is so hard for the singer. Jan DeGartani really learned the pitches. I didn't do it. I think I did it with Gloria, and it was one of the scariest pieces
Yeah.
ever. Partly because performing for Seymour was difficult because he was not a performer,
Right.
and he had none of that sort of
Visceral.
Yeah, that sense of, I've been there and I know it. Things can happen. So everything that happened was it was so upsetting for him, and you knew it.
Yeah, well, because he'd get quieter and quieter.
I know, and his ear was so sharp, and he was so passionate about everything that that was very upsetting. They finally persuaded him to conduct, which helped a lot.
Because then he maybe
I think he
understood
changed
something.
quite a lot because he realized that even when he was sort of in more the pacing, the rhythm, all that, things will happen, and I think that was probably in some ways helpful to him.
I have the thought that that same experience was one Donald Sir had.
Oh yeah.
That he was writing these impossibly fast and intricate pieces, and he really didn't quite understand what could happen.
Oh yeah.
And then he conducted some pieces of his with collage, and I think it was a revelation to him.
Same sort of thing. I think that his music had this amazing detail and that sort of actual going through the frenzy of it was something he probably really benefited from.
He always said that his Sartori in Park Avenue, based on Tea for Two.
Yeah.
I've done the piece a lot of times, including at a memorial for him. But I think the first time I did it, I asked him afterwards, "How was it? Did it go well? And did you think so?" And he said, "Well, yes, but I really prefer it unconducted." He said, "I like the anxiety the players have." And I understand that, but it was the kind of piece where you so easily could just get lost and not know that you're lost for
Sure, because
a long time because you're doing the same thing.
that's right, and because you got the ostinato where you
Yeah.
really don't you don't
Is
know
this the
exactly which one you're hearing.
35th or 36th
Yeah.
time I'm playing that.
Well, Donald was another it's interesting you mentioned him with Seymour. They both had this intense personal world in which every event was important to them, and they both had this very, very distinct lack of actually being out there making the sounds themselves, which I think made the experience of listening to their music much harder for them. I mean, they both lived it in different ways, but I mean Donald, he always said, that each time he was on tenterhooks, just wondering how it was going to come out. But he did write music uncannily such that you heard everything if it was in the right
Yes.
place.
There were kind of
Even
two
the crazy
languages.
fast pieces, it's amazing how much the detail was there.
Now this is it's hidden behind him. There's a picture. There's a photograph of Donald up there.
Yeah. I always was aware
He
of
was
that.
he was always full of doubt about his music. I'm not sure Seymour Schifrin was. I
No,
think he was just thought, why aren't they getting it?
that's true. That's true. Donald did change things a lot. In fact, when Mark DeVoto we did the
Unicorn and the Lady.
Unicorn in New York, and the parts came down. And
They didn't look like the
they
score,
were
did they?
completely different.
Yeah.
It was one of Donald's passes through the piece where he revised a whole bunch of stuff, and Mark DeVoto said there were 3 or 4 different editions.
And you didn't
Yeah.
know which was the earliest or the latest.
But he always was thinking, rethinking and thinking about it slightly different way to do it. But he had, as you know, he had one of the most uniquely determined ears that we've ever heard. I mean, you never knew what comment he would make about something that had happened. It was just going to be something you didn't expect.
Well, I remember after
Yeah.
St. Matthew Passion performance I just conducted, he comes up backstage afterwards, and he's, wow, David, wow, that's incredible. As if somehow he'd never heard the Matthew Passion.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
And he said, but I really think that last chord, the C minor chord with the B natural
with the resolution,
suspension that eventually resolves.
Yeah.
He said, I think that B natural shouldn't resolve at all. It should just stay there. C minor, C, E flat, G, B.
Yeah. Well,
And he's right.
Yeah.
Had it been part of a language, it would have
that
been.
question comes up in Mahler and Sibelius
Yes.
in a similar way. I always think of the Matthew in those moments in both those composers where you think that and Mahler eventually has the nerve in Das Lied to leave the non-chordal notes in the cadence. It seems like he's pushing that way all the way through.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Finally, he doesn't resolve it.
Some days ago, we were talking and the name Vaughan Williams came up. And something that fascinates me about you as a musician is that there's a whole raft of music that you love deeply and understand deeply. But there's also a whole mess of music out there that I think you don't necessarily love, but and I think of Mahler being one of them. I remember you were complaining about the counterpoint in the slow movement of the Fifth Symphony, that it all generated from the downbeat, and it was just, why is that happening? And you, a couple of times, you've said that Vaughan Williams was not your cup of tea, but in all of those instances, you seem to be fascinated.
Yeah,
Perhaps by what it is you don't like, or you also are able to find qualities in composers whose music you don't inherently love that you do actually respect.
Yeah, I don't know whether you do that too. I try to keep going at the ones that I don't really care for, just on the grounds that I can see that there's something, try to making progress. I have to say I've made some progress in some cases. Not getting as much traction with Dvorak as I'd hoped for. But I'm on it. I'm taking it. I'm trying to take it on. There's Shostakovich is again a work. I'm trying. I can see the virtue of it, and I can see why it's so omnipresent.
Yeah.
I don't, in terms, and I can see why in the music of the 60s and 70s of the last century, why it stands out, because it has a much stronger point of view than most of the music. I still have, let's say, deeper reserve about Shostakovich than I do about some of my other projects where I've come much further. With RVW, for instance, I really feel now, though I'll never be that British, I feel now why it has a real emotional grip. There's something really meant very fervently about his best pieces, and I'm getting much more out of it.
So you're willing to accept a musical language that you don't necessarily love or admire, but for the impact that the music has.
Yeah, and with Mahler, of course, he's like a higher. He starts at a higher level.
Yeah.
So my issue with him has really to do with it's rather technical issues. The unirhythm of the counterpoint still bothers me, and
don't the transitions bother you?
Yes,
because he has maybe one way.
The fact that the moments in the form are somewhat a little bit over labeled, partly because the shapes are very big. I feel like he feels like he has to draw with very big, broad brush to try to make you sure where you are. Mm-hmm. But there's some parts of moments in Mahler at the beginning of the Ninth Symphony. It just, I think, is absolutely phenomenal, and nobody ever thought of anything quite like it. The sense of all these lines that go to non-cadential points, which are the momentum of the piece. It's not conventional tonal music at all. Mm-hmm. There's some amazing things. He's obviously a big musical thinker, very, very powerful. It's just, it'll never be a first choice from that period. I think I like the Schoenberg 5 pieces for orchestra more than any
piece
Mahler
from
piece.
Any Mahler piece.
Yeah. That's such an incredible package of what's important at that moment in the music world. I mean, it's incredible. But Yeah, I try to keep working on the. I already years ago overcame, I think, the skepticism which was really incurred by Joseph Kerman
Yeah.
years ago about Puccini.
Oh, there was
He set me against Puccini.
I see.
And I blame him for a lot of things. I got in trouble with him. I reviewed a book for Musical America, a late Kerman book, which was kind of a tired book. Since then, I've come to feel like his Beethoven Quartet book is actually really good and very helpful and so forth. But my sour review of him is part of what I think caused Taruskin to have to refer to me and with great venom in many of his books, because he was sort of defending Kerman. So I think Kerman was wrong about Puccini.
I think the curious composers are some of the most interesting. I mean, you always said that Christopher Rouse would come back to you on a yearly basis and say, "Well, I tried again with those Verdi operas."
He would, and he did it. He really would try.
I still don't get it. I don't know exactly what he said,
Yes.
but he kept coming back.
Absolutely.
He kept trying. He didn't just write it off.
No, his goofy canon, which was really a very peculiar thing, was not unexamined. I'd have to say that for him. Yeah. He had a very odd hierarchy, but he kept testing it. Most of the time, he came back and said, "Well, yeah, look, I still find, most of Bach not that interesting."
I was looking through your collected works, that is, as listed on the publisher's website, and I'm sure there are other pieces that aren't listed there. And I quickly counted up that I've been involved in or conducted, because at least one of them I played in your wind quintet, but about 30 pieces of yours.
Yeah, that's what I was
and
thinking.
That's
the last couple.
only
weeks.
Bach and Schütz.
Unbelievable.
And even probably more than Haydn.
No, you have, as of my conducted pieces, you've premiered 3/4 of them, literally statistically 3/4 of them, which is pretty amazing.
Well,
And most of the rest were Jim, mine. But yeah, and I remember very vividly. For instance, you're the only one who's done the whole of the Montale.
is that right?
Yeah, the entire Montale.
Oh.
Yeah.
But they've done
They've
one
done
of the
well,
books.
of course, I started out with the idea that I would do not all of it because it seemed like an awful lot. So I rescored it kind of piece, sort of section by section. And it was actually a nice way to come back to the piece. It was because I certainly wrote the piano version never thinking about making another scoring. Though lately that particular thing of voice and piano music having a version for instruments has become very appealing to me. But yeah, huge number of the pieces, including orchestral pieces. Of course. I mean,
You're a very forgiving composer, and I think it's because you're a performing musician. And I remember things like a performance of Diotima that I conducted with the Boston University Orchestra. I love that piece dearly. And for some reason, the celeste player simply did not materialize for the performance. And you would think, well, the celeste is not all that important, but it would be a little bit like doing the Nutcracker without the celesta. It was a very important part. And this performance had to proceed. We had, 90 people on stage and one person was missing. And I think she thought the concert was later or it was on the second half or something like that. I don't know. And afterwards, you would never have known that there was a problem. Like, it wasn't Seymour could be saying, well, where was the celeste?
but the difference is if you perform things like that, like that happened. I did a week a residency at Indiana, and I was doing the Milos songs with the different singer in each song, and I kind of got on the percussion player because he plays a very central role in that piece, kind of concertina role, because he had not practiced, he didn't know his part, and second rehearsal still couldn't play it, just sight reading. So I gave him a pretty good lecture right there in the rehearsal, and comes the performance. It's a 4-person percussion section. Only one guy shows up. They just simply decided to skip the performance. So I'm thinking we got to do something here.
Yeah.
Recruited somebody out of the audience to sight read the part. So to cover the most exposed part, let the one guy play the part he was used to, just somehow did the performance. But I thought, well, look, everybody else is here. That's kind of what we do, you know.
Yeah.
Everybody else is here. But that was the one, really, a rebellion moment I've ever had in one of those situations, because this guy was apparently just told his pals, don't come.
But many composers would think they did not hear the piece because there were 2 or 3 percussionists missing. They simply didn't hear the piece. But I don't think that's
you've seen so many crazy things happen.
I'm reminded of the story of Eugene Lehner, whom you knew, the violist
indeed.
in the Rudolf Kolsch string quartet, and you know they were playing the Beethoven quartets from memory, and the world premiere of Bartok quartets and the Berg lyric suite, Schoenberg, and when they disbanded, Mr. Lehner came and played on the second desk of the violas in the Boston Symphony Orchestra for decades. And somebody asked him, gee, Mr. Lehner, you've done all these great things, playing all this contemporary music and the Beethoven quartets from memory, and which is a story unto itself. And and now you're in the Boston Symphony Orchestra, and it's a great orchestra, but how does it feel to be a cog in the wheel? And he said, no. He said, you misunderstand. He said, one day we were rehearsing the Fauré Requiem, and our conductor, it was a Tuesday, and we were all tired. We'd had a busy weekend, and we really didn't want to be there. And it's the Fauré Requiem. I mean, it's so easy, and we've all played it, and we know it. And the conductor turns around and looks up into the balcony and says, Madame Boulanger, will you come up and conduct my orchestra? Of course, it was my orchestra, you know. And she came up, or came down and onto the podium, and he said, I want to go out and hear the orchestra. And that was probably a ruse. So she came up, and aside from the fact it was probably the first woman to stand on the podium of the Boston Symphony Orchestra, she was also an incredibly famous woman, you know, teacher of all the great early 20th century composers that we can name, basically. And he said she started rehearsing the piece as if she were going to do the performance. She said, no, viola's here, and cellos, and shape it this way, and talking and singing, and he said the whole thing, this is a Tuesday morning, we didn't want to be there, and the thing came alive. And he said, I learned a really important thing that day, and that was that it's important for me at any point in the rehearsal, on the second stand of the violas, to imagine that the conductor might say, Eugene, will you come up and conduct my orchestra? I'd like to go out and hear how it sounds. And that whenever the conductor says, play at the tip, play off the string, louder, softer, faster, whatever, I always think, first, I will do it because this has to be a unified effort. But I always think, would I do it that way if the conductor said to me, Eugene, come up and conduct the orchestra? Is that what I would want? And I'm always engaged with what I believe about how the piece should go. And he was a wonderful presence in that orchestra to watch, and you could tell that he was thoroughly engaged.
That was how he worked it out. also a phenomenal chamber music coach through his whole career. Incredible guy. Yeah. You know, I played for Requiem under her in a pickup orchestra at Harvard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What was that like?
Well, it was it was a little disconcerting because she had those super ears. I mean, she was solfeging like crazy all the time, and very, very high sense of rhythmic exactness. Same program, she also did a set in which they got together a bunch of madrigal singers, and she played her Monteverdi Continuo thing, like that early recording, you know, the first ever Monteverdi madrigal recording. No, she was obviously with Fauré is a big deal because that's her teacher,
Sure.
and you know, we did a piece of her sisters. We did a typical Boulanger program, and a Bach cantata. Was very interesting indeed. I mean, clearly, I guess you always notice one of the things when you're playing in an orchestra. You always notice what is this person going to be interested in, you know, and right away it was attention and rhythmic exactness, and yeah, it was quite fascinating, and big emotional thing about her. Barely able to get through this little piece by her sister. It was just like it happened yesterday. Everybody said that about her, you know.
Yeah.
That her inner mind, that her sister was the real composer and went too soon, and she had to somehow. Her teaching life was all about that, you know. Though she must have been, you know, Levin talks about her all the time. That he remembers stuff that she asked them, very, very high skill levels they were supposed to come away with. She always said Copland was the only one she didn't make cry. Because she liked him.
Was that disappointing, or she liked the fact that she was unable to make it?
She liked him so much she didn't push it that far.
Oh, I see. Okay.
He was the only one she was thought so highly of and liked so much that she wasn't going to take it to that level. Yeah.
This is great. John, I'm very grateful to you for your
I'm grateful
your time and your thoughts. And
I'm
just
grateful
you,
for
so.
for all of these events.